rage. She collapsed at station, the cowboy who saved a bride nobody wanted. The sun was hot that afternoon, and the city train station was alive with people rushing in every direction. The sound of trains arriving and departing, the clatter of footsteps on the platform, and the hum of voices created a chaotic, almost dizzying symphony. Vendors shouted to sell their goods. Children laughed or cried depending on their moods, and travelers moved with purpose, some with excitement, some with exhaustion. Among all this activity, no one noticed a young woman moving slowly across the platform, her steps uncertain and uneven. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She was dressed in a wedding gown that was once beautiful, but now looked worn and a little crumpled. The soft white fabric had smudges along the hem, and the delicate lace around her shoulders was slightly torn. But it wasn't the dress that made her stand out. It was the way she carried herself. Her shoulders were slumped, and her head hung low, as if the weight of the world rested on them. There was a sadness in her eyes that caught the occasional passerby, but most people were too busy with their own lives to notice. Clara had never imagined she would be in this situation. Just weeks earlier, she had been preparing for a life filled with happiness and love. Her fiancé, a well-known man from the city, had promised her the world, or at least the life she thought she deserved. Friends and family had admired the couple, praising their love and planning a future that seemed perfect. But everything changed in an instant. The engagement ended abruptly, leaving Clara alone, humiliated, and with nowhere to go. The city, which had once seemed full of opportunities and friends, suddenly felt cold and unforgiving.
She had tried to move on quietly, staying in small inns and paying for each night with the last of her savings, but the emotional toll was heavier than she could bear.
Desperate eyes. Every time she thought of her life before, she felt a sharp sting of betrayal. Every person she passed on the street seemed to whisper judgment whether they actually did or not. By the time she reached the train station that day, she was barely able to stand, physically and emotionally. The heat of the summer sun pressed down on her, making her feel weak and dizzy. She tried to steady herself against a wooden railing, but her legs wobbled beneath her. Clara's breathing became shallow, and a wave of nausea rolled over her. 8. People moved past, their faces a blur. She wanted to call for help, to ask someone to stop, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. The world spun, and the noise of the station became distant and muffled. Then, without warning, she collapsed. One moment she was standing, and the next she was on the hot concrete, her hands scraping slightly as she fell. The crowd around her shifted briefly, some staring in surprise, some moving quickly away. A few people glanced at her with concern but did not stop. Perhaps they assumed someone else would help, or perhaps they were too caught up in their own busy lives. Clara felt a sharp pang of fear and confusion. Her heart was racing, and her vision blurred. She wanted someone to help, but she felt invisible. The sounds of the station became faint, and all she could focus on was the pounding of her own heart and the heat of the ground beneath her. Tears pricked her eyes, not just from the physical pain, but from the overwhelming sense of loneliness. For the first time in her life, she realized that she had no one to turn to, no safety net, no guiding hand to lift her from despair. Then, as if by fate, a man appeared. He was unlike anyone else in the station. His clothes were simple and practical: a worn hat, a sturdy jacket, and boots coated in dust from long travel. He had a presence that made people notice, even if they did not know why. His eyes were steady and kind, and his movements were calm and deliberate. This was Jackson McAllister, a cowboy returning home from a long cattle drive. He had spent weeks on the open plains, riding under the sun and caring for animals, living a life far removed from the hustle and bustle of the city.
Yet, despite the differences in their worlds, something about Clara's fall caught his attention immediately.
Jack moved quickly to her side, kneeling down with ease. He placed his hands gently on her arms, checking for a response. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm and firm, carrying a sense of authority without being harsh. Clara tried to answer but could only manage a soft, broken sound. Jack noticed the pallor of her face, the rapid flutter of her chest, and he realized she needed more than just words. He lifted her carefully, supporting her back and helping her onto a nearby bench. His hands were strong but gentle, showing that he understood the fragility of the moment. Clara leaned against him slightly, not because she trusted him yet, but because she had no strength to resist. The crowd around them continued their daily rush, but Jack's presence created a small pocket of safety. He remained focused, unshaken by the noise or the indifference of others. Station doctor arrived shortly after, called by someone passing by. Jack stayed with Clara, refusing to step away. The doctor checked her pulse, listened to her breathing, and asked a few questions. Clara, still weak, murmured fragments of her story, her abandonment, her fear, and her sense of having no one left to care for her. The doctor nodded sympathetically, but admitted that there was little he could do beyond giving her some water and letting her rest.
Jack made a decision.
He offered to take her away from the station, away from the heat, the noise, and the judgmental eyes of strangers. Clara hesitated. She didn't know this man, had never met him, and yet she felt a strange sense of safety in his presence. Perhaps it was the steadiness of his voice, the calm in his movements, or the way he did not ask for anything in return. With a deep breath, she nodded, and Jack helped her stand. They moved toward the exit, Jack supporting her as they left the station behind. The streets were crowded, and people glanced at them curiously, but no one stopped to interfere. Clara felt a mixture of fear and relief. Brusque. She did not know where they were going, but she trusted in some small way that Jack would lead her somewhere safe. As they walked, Clara began to notice details she had not seen before. Jack's boots were scuffed and worn from long rides, his hands were calloused, and his hat shaded a face weathered by sun and wind. There was a quiet strength about him, a sense that he had faced challenges in life and had learned to endure. For the first time in days, Clara felt that she might not be completely alone. They reached a small carriage waiting nearby. Jack helped Clara into it, making sure she was seated comfortably. The journey ahead was long, and the city blurred past in a haze of buildings, streets, and faces. Clara leaned back exhausted and allowed herself to rest, trusting Jack to guide her. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the road. The heat of the day slowly cooled, and the noise of the city faded into a distant hum. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the gentle movement of the carriage and the quiet reassurance of Jack's presence. She did not know what awaited her, whether safety, comfort, or challenges, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. Jack glanced at her from time to time, ensuring she was comfortable. He did not speak much, understanding that words were not always necessary. His presence alone provided a sense of security, a quiet strength that Clara had not felt in a long time.
The journey was slow, but it was deliberate, giving Clara time to gather herself and prepare for whatever came next.
By the time the carriage reached the outskirts of the city, the first stars were beginning to appear in the sky. Clara opened her eyes and looked around. The buildings of the city were replaced by open land, fields stretching towards the horizon. There was a quiet beauty here, a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos she had left behind. She felt a small spark of curiosity and wonder, wondering what life might be like in this new place. Jack guided the carriage down a narrow dirt road, and Clara began to see the outline of a ranch in the distance. The sun had set completely, and the sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple. Clara felt a sense of awe at the vastness of the land, a feeling she had not experienced in the crowded streets of the city.
Finally, they arrived at the ranch. Jack helped Clara down from the carriage and led her to a modest but comfortable house.
The air smelled of fresh grass, earth, and animals. Clara felt a sense of relief and safety, a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. She looked at Jack, unsure how to express her gratitude. He simply nodded as if to say, "You're safe now." That night, Clara lay down to rest, still in her wedding dress, but with a sense of peace she had not known in weeks. Red. She thought about the events of the day, the collapse at the station, the fear, the helplessness, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a new beginning. Outside, the stars shone brightly and the night was calm. Inside, a young woman who had been abandoned, humiliated, and lost found a small measure of hope. And though she did not yet know the challenges that awaited her, she knew one thing: she was no longer alone. Clara's first night at the ranch was quiet, almost too quiet after the chaos of the city. The sounds of carriages, shouting vendors, and rushing crowds had been replaced by the gentle whisper of wind through the trees, the distant lowing of cows, and the soft rustle of leaves. It was a peacefulness she had never known, and yet, at first, it made her uneasy. She had grown used to constant noise, constant movement, constant distractions that kept her mind occupied.
Here, with nothing but the open sky and the endless land around her, she had only herself to think about.
Bray. She sat on the edge of a wooden chair in the small guest room that Jack had prepared for her. The room was simple but clean. A small bed with a plain quilt, a wooden dresser, and a single window that looked out over the wide fields. Clara took a deep breath and ran her hands over the fabric of the quilt. Breath. It smelled faintly of straw, earth, and something fresh, something alive. She let herself sink into the chair and close her eyes for a moment. The exhaustion of the day hit her all at once, and her body felt heavy. Jack knocked gently on the door before entering. He did not wear the city man's polished clothes or hurried demeanor. He wore simple trousers, a plain shirt, and his boots were still dusty from travel. But there was an air of calm authority about him, a presence that seemed to reassure without needing words.
"You should rest," he said simply.
His voice was deep but gentle, steadying in a way that made Clara feel safer. "Tomorrow we'll talk more." Clara nodded, grateful but unable to speak. Her throat was dry, her voice hoarse from the day's stress and tears. Jack gave her a small smile, not the kind that suggested amusement, but the kind that meant understanding, patience, and no judgment. He turned to leave, but paused. "If you need anything tonight, just call," he said before stepping back into the hallway. Alone again, Clara finally allowed herself to cry, but the tears were quiet at first, slipping silently down her cheeks. Then they came in heavier waves. She cried for the loss of her engagement, the shame she had felt in public, the fear of being alone, and the overwhelming uncertainty of her future. For weeks, she had tried to hold it all in, to keep herself composed for the world. But now, in the safety of this stranger's home, she could finally release the tension she had carried for so long. When she finally slept, it was a restless but deep sleep, the kind that comes only when the body and mind are utterly exhausted. She dreamed of crowded streets, the station, her fiancé's disappointed face. And then, strangely, a wide-open field under a bright sun with a man on horseback watching over her. When she awoke, the light of morning streamed gently through the window, and she felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation for what the day might bring. Jack was already in the kitchen when she descended. The aroma of coffee and fresh bread filled the small house. He moved with quiet efficiency, preparing a simple breakfast. The kitchen was rustic but warm, with sunlight pouring over the wooden table, casting long shadows. Clara watched him for a moment, noticing the care in his movements. Breath. Everything about him suggested experience, patience, and self-reliance. "Good morning," Jack said, not looking up from the bread he was slicing. "Sleep well?" Clara hesitated before answering.
I think so,"
she said softly. It was not a full truth, but it was enough. She sat at the table, unsure of what to do with herself. In the city, mornings had always been rushed, filled with obligations and appearances. Here, time seemed slower, more deliberate, but she felt almost overwhelmed by the simplicity and calm of it all. Jack placed a plate in front of her. "Eat." "You'll need your strength today," he said. "There's work to do." Clara looked at the food, a plain slice of bread, some butter, and a cup of coffee. It was simple, not fancy, but it smelled inviting. She took a bite, then another, and felt warmth spread through her body. As she ate, Jack explained that life on the ranch was hard work, but it was honest and rewarding. There were animals to care for, fences to mend, fields to tend, and chores to complete each day. For someone like Clara, it was a world away from the city life she had known. After breakfast, Jack helped her step outside. The sunlight was bright, and the air smelled of grass, earth, and livestock. The sight of the open field stretched endlessly, dotted with trees and small hills. Clara felt both fear and excitement. She had never lived like this before, never been responsible for a living landscape, never needed to rise with the sun and work with her hands. Jack began by showing her the basics: how to care for the animals, how to carry water without spilling it, how to identify signs of illness or distress in the horses and cattle. At first, Clara felt clumsy and unsure, dropping buckets and stumbling over uneven ground. She was embarrassed, but Jack never criticized her. Instead, he offered gentle corrections, demonstrating patiently, and always encouraging. "Slow down," he would say. "Pay attention."
You will learn.
Hours passed, and Clara's hands became sore, her muscles tired, but there was a growing sense of accomplishment. She realized that with effort and patience, she could actually do this.
She could care for the animals, manage small tasks, and even feel a quiet pride in the work she was doing. Jack watched her with a careful eye, stepping in only when necessary, letting her experience success and failure equally. During a brief rest under the shade of an old oak tree, Clara finally spoke more about herself. She told Jack about her failed engagement, the city that had seemed so promising, and the loneliness that had followed. She did not expect him to offer advice or judgment, only a listening ear. Jack nodded thoughtfully, listening with an attention that made her feel truly heard for the first time in weeks. "Brave as his eyes are stronger than you think. You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "You've been through a lot, but you're still standing." They were simple, but they carried weight. No one in the city had ever spoken to her like that. They had pitied her, judged her, or ignored her entirely. But Jack, this quiet, strong man from a world so different from hers, offered respect, kindness, and a belief in her that she had almost forgotten existed. The days that followed became a rhythm. Clara woke with the sun, worked alongside Jack, and slowly began to understand the land and the life it offered. She learned to feed the animals, mend fences, and even ride a horse, under Jack's careful guidance. Every task was new, challenging, and sometimes frightening, but with each success, her confidence grew. Psst. She began to laugh again, quietly at first, then more openly, the sound carrying across the fields. Jack noticed these small changes and never commented overtly, but there was a subtle approval in his actions. He would hand her the reins of a horse with a nod, ask her opinion on a task, or smile at her when she completed a difficult chore. In this quiet way, he taught her not just survival skills, but trust, patience, and self-respect. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jack and Clara sat on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sky stretched endlessly, the air smelled of fresh grass and evening dew, and the animals settled into their pens for the night. Clara felt a profound sense of peace, one she had not known for years. She realized that she was beginning to heal, not just from the heartbreak she had suffered, but from the weariness of a life that had demanded too much of her without giving anything back. Jack spoke little, but his presence was enough. They sat together, sharing the silence and the beauty of the land. But Clara thought about how far she had come, from collapsing on a crowded city platform, alone and desperate, to sitting here, supported, cared for, and learning to rebuild her life. It was a journey that was only beginning, but for the first time she felt hope. In the following weeks, Clara continued to grow. She learned not only the practical skills of ranch life, but also the rhythms of patience, observation, and quiet courage. Jack became a mentor, a protector, and slowly a friend. Their relationship was built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding, far removed from the superficial promises she had once known. At night, she would sometimes lie awake, reflecting on the events that had brought her here. She remembered the station, the collapse, the panic, and the sudden appearance of Jack. She realized how fragile life could be, how quickly circumstances could change, and yet how unexpected kindness could shift everything. She had been invisible, unnoticed, abandoned, but Jack had seen her. He had acted when others would not, and that act of compassion had set her on a path to recovery, hope, and a new life. Each day was a lesson, each moment an opportunity to grow stronger. Clara learned that life was not always kind, but it could be beautiful. She discovered resilience she had not known she possessed, and realized that love and trust could come from the most unexpected places. And most importantly, she began to understand that she was worthy of care, respect, and happiness, not because of her past, her status, or her appearance, but simply because she existed. Life on the ranch became a rhythm, steady and unchanging in ways that the city could never offer. Each morning, Clara woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through her window, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle crowing of roosters. The air smelled of earth, grass, and dew, a scent so different from the city's smoke and dust that it almost took her breath away. At first, the sheer quiet and space made her uneasy. She had been used to constant noise, constant demands, and constant reminders of where she had failed. Here, there was none of that. Just open fields, the hum of life, and Jack. Jack McAllister had already begun his morning chores before Clara stepped outside. The sight of him moving with ease across the ranch, the way he guided the horses, checked the fences, and spoke softly to the animals, filled her with admiration. He seemed so at home here, as if the land itself had made him strong, patient, and careful. Watching him, she realized that she could learn from this life, that the quiet strength he carried was something she could try to build within herself. "Morning," Jack said, tipping his hat. His voice was calm, carrying no judgment, only acknowledgement of her presence. Clara returned a small smile. At first she had felt awkward and out of place, uncertain of how to act or speak in this new world. But gradually, each day gave her confidence. She learned to carry water without spilling it, to feed the animals carefully, and to mend fences with precision. Each task was a small victory, a reassurance that she could do more than survive. She could thrive.
One morning, Jack handed her the reins of a horse he called Daisy.
"Try walking her around the field," he instructed. "She's gentle, but she needs a firm hand."
Don't rush.
Clara's heart pounded with nervousness. She had never ridden a horse before, let alone in open fields that stretched farther than her eyes could see. But she trusted Jack. She took a deep breath, lifted herself into the saddle, and felt the warmth of Daisy beneath her. The horse shifted slightly, nudging her forward. Clara held the reins tightly, listening to Jack's instructions. Good. Breathe. Jack said quietly, walking beside them. Feel her movements. Don't fight them. At first, Clara's movements were stiff and awkward. She leaned too far forward, held the reins too tightly, and Daisy reacted by trotting nervously. Jack guided her gently, demonstrating the correct way to sit, how to balance, and how to communicate with the horse without force. With every word, every correction, Clara felt more confident. She began to feel the rhythm of Daisy's gait, to anticipate her steps, and finally to ride with a sense of harmony. The wind on her face, the open sky above, and the steady movement beneath her made her heart race, not from fear, but from exhilaration. By the time they returned to the stable, Clara was laughing, a sound she had almost forgotten she could make freely. Jack's quiet smile showed approval, though he said nothing. She felt pride in her accomplishment, a sense of achievement that went far beyond any recognition she had received in the city. Here she was learning something real, something tangible, and it mattered. Days passed, and with each day, Clara became more capable. She learned the routines of the ranch, how to anticipate the needs of the animals, how to manage small chores efficiently, and even how to prepare simple meals from fresh ingredients. Every task was a chance to prove to herself that she was not helpless, that she could take responsibility and succeed. And with each success, she felt stronger, more alive, and more at home in a world so different from the city she had left behind. Jack, as always, remained patient and careful. He never pushed her beyond her limits, but he encouraged her gently, offering guidance only when necessary. His teaching was subtle, his approval quiet, but it carried weight. Clara began to notice the small ways he showed care. A hand on her back as she climbed onto a horse, a nod of encouragement when she completed a difficult chore, or the way he would pause to watch her work, letting her feel accomplished without interference. Over time, Clara also learned about Jack's own life. He had grown up on this ranch, learned to ride horses before he could walk properly, and spent years working with his family to maintain the land. He had known hardship and loss, but he had learned resilience, patience, and the value of honest work. Hearing his stories made Clara feel connected to this world, to the rhythms of a life lived closely with the land, animals, and the changing seasons. She realized that her own struggles, while different, had taught her resilience as well, and that perhaps they were more alike than she had first thought. The bond between them grew slowly. It was not spoken, at least not in words. There were no grand declarations, no sudden gestures of affection. Instead, it was built on quiet moments, shared tasks, and mutual respect. Clara began to trust him fully, feeling safe in his presence in a way she had not felt with anyone before. Jack, in turn, treated her with patience, kindness, and consideration, never taking advantage of her vulnerability, always giving her space to grow and regain her confidence. One afternoon, as they repaired a broken fence along the edge of the property, Clara paused to rest. She wiped the sweat from her brow and looked out over the fields, stretching endlessly in front of them. The sun was warm, the wind gentle, and the birds sang in the distance. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life here, not just surviving, but living fully, freely, and with purpose. Jack watched her quietly, leaning against a post. "You're doing well," he said finally. "Batzak. Better than I thought." Clara felt a rush of embarrassment mixed with pride. I'm learning," she said softly. "You've always had the strength," Jack replied. "You just needed the right place to find it." His words settled over her like a comforting blanket. She realized that she had been carrying her pain and fear alone for too long, believing that she was weak and unworthy. But here, on this ranch, she was discovering something different, that she was capable, resilient, and deserving of care. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's confidence grew. She rode horses alone across the fields, tended the animals without guidance, and even began helping Jack with planning the daily routines. The past, she noticed subtle changes in herself. She laughed more easily, her posture grew steadier, and she moved with a sense of purpose that had been absent in her life for years. The city's expectations, the humiliation of her failed engagement, and the fear of rejection were gradually replaced with self-respect, pride, and a quiet joy in the work she did. One evening after a long day of chores, Jack and Clara sat on the porch of the small house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, the clouds glowing softly in the fading light. The animals had been fed and settled for the night, and the ranch was calm. Clara leaned back in her chair, feeling the cool evening air on her face, and let herself relax completely for the first time in months. Jack poured them both a cup of tea and handed one to her. They sipped quietly, watching the colors of the sunset deepen and fade. The silence was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than awkwardness. Clara realized that she had grown to cherish these moments. The simplicity, the beauty of the land, and the quiet companionship of someone who truly cared. "You've changed a lot since you arrived," Jack said after a while. His voice was gentle, reflective, and carried no judgment. Raised.
Clara looked at him, surprised.
I think I have, she admitted. I feel stronger.
Burr, that's good, he said simply.
You needed a chance to find yourself again. Clara nodded, thinking about the city, the station, and the collapse that had brought her here.
She realized how fragile life could be, how quickly circumstances could change, and yet how much possibility existed even in the darkest moments. She had been broken, frightened, and abandoned. But here she had found a chance to rebuild. The bond between Clara and Jack deepened with each passing day. There was no rush, no pressure, only a steady, growing connection built on trust, respect, and shared experience. Clara began to notice small gestures. Jack leaving her favorite tea ready in the morning, checking on her during chores, and the quiet encouragement in his gaze.
She realized that love, or at least something like it, was forming slowly, naturally, without words or expectation.
Through this experience, Clara learned more than just the practical skills of ranch life. She learned patience, self-respect, and the value of hard work. She discovered that kindness and care could exist without conditions, that trust could grow in unexpected places, and that a person could be valued not for their status or past, but for their actions, intentions, and strength of character. By the time winter approached, Clara was no longer the fragile, uncertain young woman who had collapsed at the city station. She was confident, capable, and resilient. She knew how to care for the animals, and manage the ranch's daily routines. But more importantly, she had learned to trust herself and the people who truly cared for her. And she had learned that Jack, the quiet, steady cowboy, was someone she could rely on, not just for guidance but for companionship, understanding, and perhaps, in time, something deeper. The winter had been harsh, with cold winds sweeping across the plains and frost covering the ground each morning. Yet, despite the chill, Clara felt warmth she had not known in years. She had grown strong, capable, and independent. The woman who had once collapsed at the crowded city station, weak and fearful, was gone. In her place was someone who had faced hardships, learned new skills, and discovered the resilience she had always carried within her. Jack noticed the change too. It was subtle at first. The way she moved with confidence while handling the horses, the careful way she fed the animals without assistance, and the small, proud smile she gave herself after completing a difficult task. But it was more than physical skill. Clara's eyes carried a calm strength, a quiet certainty, and a spark of hope that had not existed before. Jack felt a deep respect for her, mixed with an affection he had not expected to feel so strongly. One morning as the sun rose slowly over the frozen fields, Jack called Clara to help him gather the horses from the far side of the ranch. The sky was painted in pale shades of pink and gold, and the cold air bit at their cheeks. Clara pulled her scarf tight and followed Jack through the snow-dusted pasture. The horses were grazing quietly, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Clara approached them with ease, speaking softly and guiding them gently into a small corral. Jack watched her from a few feet away, smiling quietly. She had learned patience, care, and understanding, qualities that made her more than capable in this environment. "You've come a long way," Jack said, his voice low but full of warmth. "I don't think anyone could have done this as quickly as you have." Clara laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I had a good teacher," she said, glancing at him with a hint of playfulness. Jack shook his head, smiling faintly. "You had the courage to try," he said. "That's what matters." Their days continued in a rhythm both steady and comforting. Clara learned to predict the needs of the ranch, to anticipate changes in the weather, and to care for the animals with knowledge and confidence. Each task, no matter how small, became an opportunity for her to demonstrate her growth. She repaired fences, fed livestock, mended tools, and even helped Jack plan the layout for the upcoming spring planting. Every success filled her with pride, and each evening, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment and belonging. But beyond the work, there was something else that had quietly grown between them. The bond that had started with trust had developed into something stronger, a connection that neither of them forced or named. Clara began to notice the small gestures, Jack pausing to offer her a warm drink during a cold morning, the careful way he walked beside her while riding, and the soft encouragement in his eyes when she faced challenges. These moments were gentle, subtle, and yet they carried a weight that made Clara's heart flutter. One evening after a long day of mending fences, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, bright. The stars shone brightly, the sky clear and endless above them. Clara sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her. "Say," she glanced at Jack, who was quiet, lost in thought. For a long moment, they simply watched the sky, the silence between them comfortable and filled with unspoken understanding.
"I never thought I'd find a place like this," Clara said softly.
Burst. Her voice carried both awe and gratitude. "A place where I can..." Bert. "Just be." Jack looked at her, his eyes steady and kind.
"You belong here," he said simply. "Not because of what you've done or who you were, but because of who you are."
Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief, gratitude, and newfound strength. But she had spent so long believing she was unworthy, abandoned, and invisible. Yet here, in the quiet of the ranch, she had found acceptance, care, and respect. And more than that, she had found someone who saw her, not as a broken woman, but as someone capable, resilient, and worthy of love. The days turned into weeks, and Clara's confidence grew even more. She began to take initiative on the ranch, making decisions about the animals, the crops, and daily routines. Jack encouraged her, offering guidance when necessary, but allowing her to lead. Their partnership was natural, balanced, and built on trust. Clara felt a deep sense of pride in herself, knowing that she was no longer reliant on anyone else to define her worth. Breath. And then came a quiet moment, one that would forever change the course of her life. One afternoon, Jack asked her to ride with him to check the farthest pastures. The snow had begun to melt in patches, and the air was warm with the promise of spring. As they rode side by side, the silence between them felt comfortable, familiar, and intimate. Clara looked at him, feeling a flutter in her chest she could not ignore. "Clara," Jack said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Breaths. His voice was low, serious, but not heavy. I need you to know.
You've changed my life!
Clara's heart skipped a beat. She turned toward him, unsure how to respond.
I've been alone for a long time, Jack continued.
This ranch, the work, the land, it's all I've known. But you've brought something I didn't know I needed. Hope. Joy. Someone to share the life I love. Prick her eyes. She had dreamed of safety, kindness, and acceptance. But hearing someone speak so openly of affection and trust was almost overwhelming. Respect. Jack, she began, but her voice faltered. Jack reached out, taking her hand gently in his. You don't need to say anything now. I just want you to know that I care for you. Not because of what's happened, but because of who you are. And I want to share this life with you, if you'll have it.
Clara felt a warmth spread through her, stronger than any fire in the hearth, deeper than any comfort she had known.
She realized that she had already begun to care for him in ways she had never expected, ways that went beyond gratitude or trust. She nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. I would like that, she said softly. I want that too. Jack smiled a quiet, relieved smile and squeezed her hand. For a moment, they simply sat together, holding hands and letting the vast open sky witness their unspoken promise. They did not need words to define the depth of what had begun. It was enough to feel it, to live it, and to know that they had found something rare and enduring. In the weeks that followed, their partnership grew stronger. They worked together on the ranch, shared meals, laughed at small mistakes, and celebrated successes. The land itself seemed to reflect their growing bond. The fields looked greener, the animals calmer, and the seasons changing with a sense of promise and renewal. Clara had not only learned to thrive in this world, she had learned to embrace it fully, with Jack by her side. One spring morning, Clara walked through the fields, feeling the sun warm her face. Dish! The earth was alive, the animals bustling with energy, and the ranch filled with the quiet harmony of life. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the collapse at the station, the fear, the uncertainty, and the kindness of a stranger who had seen her worth. Breath. She realized that she had not only survived but had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable than she had ever imagined.
Jack rode up beside her, smiling.
Beautiful day, isn't it? He said. Clara nodded, her heart full. It is, she said, and I feel like I belong here.
You do, Jack said. And, so do I, now that we're together.
Clara looked at him, a smile spreading across her face. She realized that life, which had once seemed cruel and unpredictable, could be full of kindness, love, and hope. Great. She had been a bride nobody wanted, abandoned and alone. But she had found something far more valuable. A life she could call her own, a partner who respected and cherished her, and the courage to embrace the future. The train station, the city, and the despair she had felt there were now distant memories. She had been broken, lost, and invisible, but she had been saved, not just by Jack, but by her own strength, resilience, and willingness to accept help. And as she stood beside Jack, looking out over the fields and the endless horizon, she knew that this was only the beginning. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. Together they would care for the land, the animals, and each other. And together they would live a life defined not by loss or fear, but by love, trust, and the quiet, enduring beauty of a second chance. In that moment, Clara felt whole, cherished, and alive. The woman who had collapsed at the station was gone. In her place was someone who had been given a second chance, someone who had learned to love, to trust, and to be loved in return. And that, she knew, was worth more than anything the city could have offered.